The final second ticks away. Dogs are winners. A national championship for a new generation of Bulldogs.
While Georgia finally returned to the top of college football, some other major programs are giving chase by making a huge splash on the coaching carousel. And it all began when USC pried away Lincoln Riley from Norman, Oklahoma.
There's a good vibe about this team right now. They're putting a real effort into fully buying in.
Meantime, Brian Kelly went from Notre Dame to LSU and hit the ground running.
I love the energy, the enthusiasm. There's an incredible want to.
Taking over for Kelly at Notre Dame is Marcus Freeman, a hire that went over well with returning players.
We have to have a mindset. Every drill, every rep, we got to win. We got to win.
And down in Miami, Mario Cristobal hired to bring the swagger back to the U.
When the U is on and the U brings it, there's nothing like it. And we got to get there.
In other moves, Billy Napier went to the Swamp. Dan Lanning got his first crack at being a head coach at Oregon, as did Brent Venables at Oklahoma. Which head coach will have the most immediate success? The results come in the fall, but it all starts in the spring.
Let's welcome in some of our crew behind the Cover 3 podcast. We have Barrett Sallee, Tom Fornelli, and one Dennis Dodd in New Orleans there for the Final Four. Shout out to producer Mayron, who is labeling this the spring breakdown, teams that you guys are focused on. Dennis, we're going to start with you there in the Big Easy. You claim people are still sober. Tom and I don't really believe that. But you got to visit LSU. Give us a preview of this team right now.
Yeah, I went and saw Brian Kelly on Tuesday and was really impressed. Hadn't seen LSU, hadn't seen Brian Kelly for a few years. He's absolutely wired in. The question I had, and a lot of people have about Brian Kelly, is great coach, accomplished, but fish out of water maybe at LSU. And can he get used to not only the culture in the SEC, but the culture at LSU is just different. I've seen more night games at Tiger Stadium than he has. And I told him that, and he kind of chuckled and said, yeah, I can't wait to be there. But it's more of a house cleaning, guys, right now. 42 new employees in the football building, 36 new faces on the football team. He's got this thing called SWAT. It's a platform for off-season conditioning and conduct. He can literally see on a wall in his office in real time where someone is. Did he show up for training? Was he late? Was he early? And they add up points and they compete in pods, but that has less to do with what LSU can be. He talked Miles Brennan in off the ledge. Miles Brennan, 6-year quarterback, was in the transfer portal. Brian Kelly called him up and said, do you want to play for LSU? Absolutely. He wants one final chance after those two big injuries to be the starter at quarterback. They brought in Jayden Daniels from Arizona State. And I'm not going to say either one's going to light the house on fire, but it is competition. And what do they say? Iron sharpens iron. I don't know if we have iron between these two. But the overriding message I got was LSU has to rebuild itself. LSU always has talent. They always have players. It may not be reflected on the field, but a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, they did win the national championship. And he was pretty forceful, a lot of candor about what he has to do, a lot of accountability. I think guys that don't measure up are going to be told to hit the highway, and that's why he's brought in a lot of these transfers. 36 players. That includes grades, guys that transferred, not including guys that have graduated. So a lot of players have left LSU. Brian Kelly, and I know you're going to ask the question, what about the social media stuff? I saved that till last, and he said he totally embraces it. You can make fun of him if you want, but he says if you don't do it, these guys these days, recruits, players will look at you sideways and say, is he really buying in? That's the way he explained it.
Well, Dennis, it's still weird, but the SEC team that I'm going to talk about is Auburn, and no one had an off season like Auburn. It was uniquely dramatic in a way that only Auburn can have, with Brian Harsin basically in limbo after year one for an entire week. So this is an interesting year because all of those voices that were in the ear of the Board of Trustees and the president and the athletic director, they're still there. So Brian Harsin has to win and win now. I'm just not sure that he's got the roster to do with it. I think when you look at what they need to do, they got a really interesting quarterback situation with TJ Finley, who started the last couple of games last year, was really banged up. But Zach Calzada's there, and so far through spring, Zach Calzada, the former A&M starter, has been limited with a shoulder injury, but he has the most experience out of that crew. But keep an eye on Robbie Ashford, an Oregon transfer, dual threat kid out of Hoover High School. He could put a push on this as well. So I think Auburn has a very interesting quarterback situation with 3 different transfers and then a defensive line that has to be replenished. And it's an interesting year for Auburn. They have a very tough schedule, and if they don't get off to a hot start, all of those people who tried to get Brian Harsin fired in February will probably get him fired in October.
Yeah, you know, there's a common thread between the 3 SEC teams we're talking about here today. Not just that they're all in the SEC West, it's just that there is a lot of turnover. I'm looking at the Ole Miss Rebels going into this spring as a team that has a lot of new faces in a lot of key places. And obviously, Matt Corral at quarterback is gone. Jackson Dart has come in from USC. That's going to garner a lot of attention this spring, as will Ole Miss trying to replace a lot of its leading receivers on the offensive side of the ball. But I'm more interested in the defense, because if Lane Kiffin has shown us anything throughout his tenure as a head coach or an assistant coach, is the offense is going to be fine. He knows how to call plays. They're going to score points. But the difference between an Ole Miss team that is really fun to watch and goes like 8-4 and an Ole Miss team like the one we saw last season that can compete for 10, 11 wins, get to a New Year's Six game and maybe compete for an SEC West title, is how well it plays on defense. And DJ Durkin has left as defensive coordinator to go take over at Texas A&M, and they've got new coaches coming in to run the defense and a lot of transfers coming in at key spots on the defensive line, at the linebacker position, at safety. And it's going to be interesting to see how quickly that Ole Miss defense can begin the process of figuring out its new look and figuring out how to play with one another, because defenses are units. You can't just have one guy making spectacular plays. Everybody has to be doing their job to be successful, especially when you're going up against some of the offenses they'll be facing this year. So for me, that's the biggest thing about Ole Miss this spring.
Let's go to the Big Ten. Dennis, you're focused on Michigan there. And as we kind of refresh ourselves here in the spring, I was like, oh, what was going on with Michigan? Oh, yeah, the whole Jim Harbaugh to the NFL. Is that now a thing of the past? What's going on?
Yeah, I'm through bashing Jim Harbaugh. On the second signing day, we all know he was interviewing for the Minnesota Vikings job. Not only did he not get the job, he held the recruiting class together, he got an extension, and he got a raise. I want that life. And you know what? He's a pretty good coach. I've determined that after 7 years at Michigan. They are the reigning Big Ten champions. He's had turnover. He's had to hire new coordinators on both sides of the ball. Sharon Moore is the former assistant coach there, who's now sharing the duties with Matt Weiss, the former quarterbacks coach, who will retain those duties. But there's a good story to tell about Jim Harbaugh, and he's got a bunch of them, besides Colin Kaepernick coming along for the spring game on Saturday, being an honorary captain. And I thought I read going to have a throwing exhibition, quote unquote, at halftime. Well, forget that. John Madden, shortly before he died, texted Jim Harbaugh. And he's a friend of the family, John Madden, and just wanted to go out of his way to compliment him on his offensive line play. The Michigan offensive line, if you don't know, won the Joe Moore Award for best offensive line in the country. And Jim Harbaugh immediately saved that and went to Sharon Moore, the offensive line coach, who's now co-offensive coordinator, and said, put this in your phone and save it forever. I thought that was a pretty good anecdote and explained that 2012 season a lot. I don't think Michigan ran a lot of a different offense than they did the first 6 years under Jim Harbaugh. I just thought they had better players and they ran it better. And they are the defending champs. The thing to watch in the spring, in this spring game on Saturday, for the second straight year, Cade McNamara and J.J. McCarthy are going head-to-head to see who starts. Cade McNamara set the single-season passing record against Michigan State. He got them to a playoff and now has to fight off the guy who's perceived as the next one. The question is, if Cade McNamara wins the job, does J.J. McCarthy transfer now? He didn't last year. He was worked into the offense strategically every game. So I think that's something to watch. This is one of those spring games, guys, that really means something. They're going to parse the playing time, or we should parse the playing time of those two guys. That's going to be interesting.
If we're going to start with Michigan, I've got to follow and talk about Ohio State because that's just the way things work in the Big Ten. I think the biggest storyline surrounding the Buckeyes this season after not winning the division, not winning the conference, and not getting to the playoff is the change on the defensive side of the ball. The big hire bringing in Jim Knowles to run the defense, who had been the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State. And if we look at what has been Ohio State's weakness the last few years, it has been on the defensive side of the ball where we've seen the secondary get torn apart by stronger passing offenses. And a big reason for that is the pass rush that we kind of grew to expect from an annual basis of an Ohio State program that was sending Joey Bosa, Nick Bosa, and Chase Young to the NFL in the top 5 of every single draft kind of disappeared the last few years. So in comes Knowles, who kind of brought an entirely new identity to an Oklahoma State program that was never known for its defense. And it was through his defense in which they ranked 6th in pressure rate and 5th in sack rate over the last 2 seasons. 2 categories that Ohio State really needs to improve upon. So for me, Ohio State this spring, the big thing to watch is how well that defense plays and if they can get better pressure on the quarterback. Because if they do, we already know what they have on offense, and they suddenly become a college football playoff and national title contender again.
Guys, for a long time, we've been asking who's going to challenge Ohio State. Well, it was Michigan last year, but a lot of times we say it's going to be Penn State, and yet it doesn't happen. But don't forget, they were number 4 in the country last year, but then lost 6 of their last 8. So I think a lot of eyes are looking at James Franklin like, dude, when are you going to finally put this thing together? This might be the year, or it needs to be the year, because Sean Clifford is back, a veteran quarterback, been around the block, a veteran secondary that's going to help out in a Big Ten that is becoming more pass happy, but they've got to figure out how to run the ball. Kevon Lee is a guy that I think we all need to look out for. He's been pretty solid this spring and could be their number 1 running back. But my biggest thing is look, Michigan's great, Ohio State's great, Penn State, you're supposed to be great. And yet it doesn't seem to happen. So there's a lot of pressure on James Franklin because of that. And I think Penn State needs to contend this year.
Let's head over to the Big 12. Dennis, you're taking a look at the University of Texas. I forgot that Sark's contract was 6 years, $34.2 million. So how is he going to do in his second year? We also got a new quarterback battle going on.
Yeah, win now because the stink of that Kansas loss is still around in midair. He's got to come back from 5-7 in year 2 because Texas just won't tolerate it. Of all the schools I've covered, I think they're the quickest to turn on a coach when things go bad. Maybe Auburn, Barrett. Maybe Auburn's in first place there. But he's got to win now. They've got Quinn Ewers, the quarterback from Ohio State. He originally committed to Texas, went to Ohio State to be able to capitalize on his NIL. And I think he's going to be one of the nation's best offensive stories. They've got Xavier Worthy, the sophomore receiver, who I think has a chance to be the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. The biggest area for Texas is the offensive line. It was so bad last year, literally an NIL collective formed around it. Every Texas offensive player who sees the field, as it stands now, gets $50,000 for their NIL rights. Is that going to make them play better? I don't know, but it better right away. Oklahoma's a better program. Baylor's a defending champion. A lot of pressure on Sark to win now.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the Sooners. I know Amanda likes to hear that, but mass exodus after Lincoln Riley left. But it's interesting, Brent Venables been rumored for all of these jobs. He finally gets one, and it's a big one, and he's following in Lincoln Riley's footsteps, which is going to be difficult. No Caleb Williams, but they get Dylan Gabriel through the transfer portal, former starter at UCF. I think the biggest thing, though, is Marvin Mims decided he wanted to stay rather than bail and go somewhere else. But a lot of pressure on Brent Venables. This is not a job that comes easy. They expect the college football playoff. So there's not going to be much of a learning curve for the Sooners. They need to contend. They should win the Big 12 this year with the talent that's still there. If not, I think there's going to be some side eyes looking at Brent Venables.
Texas and Oklahoma, those are SEC programs, fellas. We're supposed to be talking about the Big 12. I want to talk about Oklahoma State, who this is a program that I think is poised to take a step forward and came about a yard shy of winning the Big 12 title last year. But as we mentioned earlier, Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator, has left for Ohio State. And this is a program that in the last few years kind of flipped its identity. Mike Gundy's teams used to be known about throwing the ball all over the place and scoring 40 to 50 points per game and then hoping it gave up less on defense. The last few years, it's been a defense that's been trying to make up for an offense that can't score. So I want to see going into this season, Can the defense maintain what Jim Knowles started? And can we see some more explosive plays on this offense like we used to?
And of course, is Mike McGundy going to have a mullet yet again? Let's go to the ACC here. Dennis, you're focused on Miami. Mario Cristobal already doing great when it comes to recruiting, but what about on the field?
Yeah, another place I visited in January after the national semifinal there in the Orange Bowl. And I'm pretty close to Mario, having known him for years back to his playing days when he was at Miami. And his hiring, I think, was a result of Miami finally waking up and at least having a strategy. It seems like I've done these stories for all 4 coaches or 5 coaches that have, come after Larry Coker. Well, why is it going to be different this time? I'm not sure it's going to be different this time, but Miami has a strategy. They've thrown money at the problem. Obviously, $85 million for 10 years, reportedly, for Mario Cristobal. They've thrown SEC money at infrastructure and recruiting and facilities. How many people know that Miami has a 70-yard indoor? That may not sound like a lot to the regular person, but you need 100 to recruit. Come on. But he's got plenty of talent there. He's going to bring a lot in, a lot of transfers. Everybody's bringing in transfers. Tyler Van Dyke, the quarterback, threw for at least 316 yards in his last 4 games and totaled 13 touchdowns, so he may have the quarterback. But he wants to bring back, Mario does, the swagger of Miami. Every coach that's been there, Al Golden, everybody else, has tried and failed. Clemson is still sitting there, but with a little chink in the armor with Clemson is the ACC Open. That's what they're trying to do, get into that gap.
Look, y'all, college football is better when Florida State is good, and I think that's the biggest challenge for Mike Norvell is to get this program back to the level where they expect to contend for the ACC. And to do that, they need a strong defensive line, especially when you look at Clemson. Their offensive line has been an issue lately. So Albany transfer Jared Verse is a guy that's drawn rave reviews midway through spring practice. They've got to figure out their offense. And Jordan Travis, we heard about him last year. He went to ACC Media Days last year along with Mackenzie Milton, 2 quarterbacks. So they expect a lot out of him, but now he's the unquestioned starter. I think that's going to help him a lot as he progresses into a true number 1 without any pressure in 2022. But they got to run the football. They don't really do that very well, but Treshaun Ward is a guy that I think needs to step up. If they can run the football and take some pressure off of Jordan Travis as a passer, then I think this team can at least threaten Clemson. But the ACC is better with Florida State. Mike Norvell, I think, has some pressure on him to at least be relevant this year, and that's something I think needs to happen as they step forward and look to be contenders again.
I am absolutely fascinated about Clemson this spring because even though they're somewhat more nouveau riche than they are a college football blue blood, since they've ascended to that level of a national title contender, we have never seen this program with so many question marks going into the spring. Brent Venables left to become the head coach at Oklahoma. Tony Elliott left as the offensive coordinator to take over at Virginia. We've got questions at quarterbacks between DJ Uiagalelei and the newly hot, 5-star incoming freshman, Cade Klubnik. How is Dabo Swinney going to get all this together as Clemson is coming off one of its worst seasons in the last decade compared to where they had been? It's going to be fascinating to watch this team try to rebound and get back a hold of its place in the ACC as the program that has been the conference's crown jewel the last few years.
We all know that Dabo wants to be in those headlines. He does not like that at all. Let's go to the Pac-12 here. Dennis, I want to start with you. You're looking at UCLA coming off its first winning season since 2015. Their first 3-game winning streak, by the way, since 2015 as well. Big deal there. What can we expect from Chip Kelly and crew coming up?
Well, the team across town might be the biggest story in the offseason, Lincoln Riley and USC, and I know we're going to talk about them. But that kind of reverberates over in Westwood with UCLA. Everything Chip Kelly does is going to be viewed in comparison to what Lincoln Riley does, if you believe he's going to get them back on track. There was an inflection point in January. The athletic director had to make a decision. You either cut bait and pay Chip Kelly a big buyout, or you extend him. Well, they extended him. 4 more years, I think at $6 million per year. That was up from $4 million. And so what are you getting with Chip Kelly? Well, you've gotten a Chip Kelly that's went right to the transfer portal, gotten a lot of transfers. Again, I don't hold that as a negative anymore. There's more and more coaches bringing in more transfers than they recruit high school players, and that's what Chip does. He's not particularly enamored one of those guys that likes to go out and recruit, so that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. He gets Dorial Thompson-Robinson back for another year. Zach Charbonnet is an established back at Michigan and at UCLA. He had a great year last year. He loses the big tight end. But the question is, what are they going to be like defensively? This has been a pretty soft team under Chip Kelly. He hired a new defensive coordinator, Bill McGovern, who hasn't coordinated a defense since 2012 when he was at Boston College. We'll see which way that goes. But you mentioned it. They've got something going. I'm not going to take anything away. 8-4 last year. They opted out of the Holiday Bowl because of COVID. But they've got to get off to a fast start and at least show that they compete with USC going into November.
I'm excited about the big dog, Lincoln Riley. Everyone's talking about USC finally being back, and Lincoln Riley is certainly the guy that can take them there. But you get Caleb Williams, the hot commodity, the #1 player in the transfer portal. I think the expectations for Caleb Williams, both on the field and as a representative of certain companies here and there, is going to be huge. But I think the biggest thing is that the skill players, not just through the transfer portal, but also who was already on that campus, are there for that offense of Lincoln Riley. They get Travis Dyke out of Oregon. Their top 4 wide receivers could be transfers. The offensive line is established. So I think from an offensive standpoint, Lincoln Riley has the pieces at USC to get them back in contention and potentially in contention for a college football playoff in relatively short order. But that's a lot of pressure on Lincoln Riley. I can't wait to see what happens at USC. They've been begging and begging and begging something to hit and something to click in LA, and I think right now USC, all eyes are on them. Lincoln better perform quickly.
You know, no program in the Pac-12 has probably benefited more from USC's struggles than Oregon, and I'm really interested to see how the Ducks look this spring after Mario Cristobal left to take over at Miami, and they bring in Dan Lanning from Georgia. And I think it's a really good hire for them as far as a consistency goes, because Dan Lanning doesn't have the head coaching experience that Mario had at FIU before he took over Oregon. But they have very similar philosophies, and they understand how important recruiting is to building your program and getting the talent and going forward from there. So I think it's going to be somewhat smooth from that angle. But what's also interesting is going to be what happens at quarterback. Bo Nix, we saw him at Auburn the last few years. He's had a lot of highs and a lot more lows. He's going to Oregon. He's being reunited with his former offensive coordinator, Kenny Dillingham. And the quarterback position has kind of been a problem for the Ducks the last few years with inconsistency. So will Nix provide a stabilizing presence, or will he still be Bo Nix? And will former 4-star recruit Ty Thompson, who's been highly sought after but has had trouble getting on the field, finally make his way under center to take over that job? So that's what I'm going to watch with the Ducks this spring.
Guys, admittedly, it's been a minute since I talked about college football, and I'm now very excited. Dennis Dodd, I hope the next time we see you, you have some beads around your neck, maybe a hurricane in your hand or something. Barrett Sallee, Tom Fornelli, you guys have fun at home while Dennis is there in New Orleans. We appreciate it. Those are some of the guys behind the Cover 3 podcast. Latest episodes, by the way. The best transfers at each position. Also, your dream conference matchups for 2022, non-conference matchups, I should say, for 2022 and beyond. Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.